The maintenance badge hit the conference table with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence, flat, final, and entirely without sympathy. Nathan Reed did not reach for it. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and looked at the man who had just thrown it, and in the particular way of a person who has learned to carry weight without letting it show in his face, he did not flinch. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind Ethan Cole's desk framed the Manhattan skyline in the hard gray light of a February afternoon and beyond. The glass snow was beginning to fall on the city in slow, purposeful curtains. The 30th floor of the Atlas Dynamics Tower was warm and precisely controlled, the way everything inside Atlas Dynamics was warm and precisely controlled by design for appearance at cost. 430 employees occupied the floors above and below, and roughly 60 of them were now watching from the open-plan workspace beyond the glass partition. Someone had already raised a phone. The company, Ethan Cole, said from behind $3,000 of Italian tailoring and the practiced cadence of a man who had given this speech in his head many times before delivering it, no longer has a place for people operating at your level. He was 39 years old and had been on the cover of 4 national magazines in the past 18 months. His TED Talk on the ethics of artificial intelligence had 14 million views. He used the word innovation the way other men used punctuation reflexively, constantly, without apparent awareness of how often it appeared. Nathan Reed was 45 years old and wore the gray uniform of Atlas Dynamics Facilities Maintenance Team. The patch on his left breast pocket read N, Reed in stitched block letters below which the word maintenance appeared in smaller type. He had been wearing some version of this uniform for 6 years. "Thank you," Nathan said. He said it without irony and without performance. He picked up the badge, turned, and walked toward the elevator. Somewhere behind him, a junior engineer named Tyler, 24 years old, 3 months into his first postgraduate job, and possessed of the specific confidence of someone who has never yet been genuinely wrong about anything. Important, leaned toward his workstation neighbor and said not. Quietly enough. Was that the maintenance guy? Did they actually just fire the maintenance guy in front of everyone? His neighbor, a woman named Priya, who was a year older and significantly more observant, watched Nathan's back as he reached the elevator bank. "That's the 3rd time this month he's fixed the core relay," she said. "Without a work order." Tyler shrugged. "Still just maintenance." Priya said nothing else, but she watched until the elevator doors closed. The Atlas Dynamics Tower had been built to impress, which was the first thing Nathan had ever said about it to the architect in a conference room 11 years ago, when the building was still a set of renderings on a presentation screen. He had said it as a caution, not a compliment. Large things built primarily to impress, he had observed, tend to conceal their structural weaknesses behind the impressiveness of their surfaces. The architect had smiled and moved on to the next slide. The building had been built anyway, exactly as designed, and Nathan had eventually stopped saying things like that to people who were not listening. He rode the elevator to the basement level where the cafeteria occupied a long room with low ceilings and institutional lighting that someone had tried to soften with potted plants. Mia was at the corner table. She was always at the corner table on the 3 evenings a week, when the after-school program ended at 4:30 and Nathan's shift ended at 5. She was 10 years old with her mother's dark hair and a paperback book, open flat on the table beside her tray. And she looked up when he appeared in the cafeteria doorway with the immediate, unguarded attention of a child whose primary emotional reference point is a single parent she has learned to read like weather. She saw his face. She closed the book. "What happened?" she asked. "Change of plans," Nathan said. He sat down across from her and took the coffee she pushed toward him. She always ordered him a coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup. "We're going to have more evenings at home for a while." "Did they fire you?" He looked at her. She had been doing this since she was 7, asking the direct question, the one that other people circled around, the one that arrived before he had decided how much to say. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was approximately how long it took her to process information she had not expected and file it into its correct category. "Okay," she said. "Are we okay?" "We're okay." She nodded once with the economy of a child who has been trained not by instruction but by circumstance to conserve her worry. Then she reopened her book and Nathan drank his coffee and they sat in the cafeteria of the company he had built from a single rented server in a storage unit in Queens 15 years ago, and neither of them said anything else. He had been 29 when he wrote the first lines of code for what would become Atlas Intelligence, the foundational architecture underpinning the most widely deployed artificial intelligence system in North America. He had been 31 when the company incorporated under the name Atlas Dynamics. He had been 32 when the first institutional investment came in $40 million from a fund managed by a man named Oliver Grant, who had reviewed the architecture documentation for 11 minutes, before calling his partner and saying in the direct and unglamorous language of someone whose primary relationship is with numbers that it was the most consequential thing he had seen since the internet. He had been 34 when Emily died. The years between Emily's death and the gray badge with N. Reed printed above the word maintenance were not simple to reconstruct even for Nathan himself. There was a version of those years that the business press had told the visionary founder, overcome by personal tragedy, the company rescued from uncertainty by the steady hands of his longtime protege, and there was the version Nathan Minesteed carried inside him, which was less narrative and more texture. The weight of grief that had made it physically difficult for approximately 8 months to sit in a room with other people and perform the ordinary social transactions of leadership. The slow recognition that the company had continued to function and then to thrive without him at its center. The legal documents that had arrived during the months when he was barely reading his email, restructuring agreements, equity adjustments, board resolutions that he had signed, because a lawyer had explained them to him in simplified terms, and he had not had the capacity to engage with the implications. He had not known not for a long time exactly what those documents had cost him. He had been working the maintenance desk for 14 months before he understood that the access credentials he had kept the ones embedded in a protocol layer so deep in the system architecture that no subsequent administrator had thought to look for them still were. He had not used them. He had not decided what it meant that he still had them. He had simply gone to work every evening, fixed what needed fixing, and come home to Mia and read Chapter 7 and made sure she had what she needed, and tried not to look at the Atlas logo on the side of the building with the particular feeling it produced in him, a feeling that was not quite anger, and not quite grief, and not quite anything he had a word for. He finished his coffee. Mia closed her book. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," he said. Outside, the snow was falling harder. They were halfway to the subway entrance when every screen in the building behind them went red. It began on the lobby displays 3 panels of high-definition glass, each 8 feet tall, cycling through the Atlas Dynamics brand rotation. And then it spread in the way that catastrophic system failures spread when they originate at the architecture level, outward and upward through every force, connected surface in the building. The red was not a warning graphic or an alert overlay. It was the raw signal of a system that had lost its orienting logic, a pure broadcast from a core process that had stopped knowing what it was supposed to do. The text that appeared was brief and absolute. Core AI failure system collapse in progress. Nathan stopped walking. He stood on the sidewalk in the falling snow with his maintenance badge in his pocket and his daughter's hand in his and looked back at the building. The red light coming through the lobby glass turned the snow pink in a 3-foot radius around the entrance. People were already coming out through the revolving doors, employees in their coats, moving with the particular urgency of people who work with systems and understand at a physiological level what total system failure means. Inside, he knew the cascade would already be running. The AI middleware layer that managed logistics, client data, and the 17 federal contracts that Atlas Dynamics held, including 3 defense-adjacent agreements that required continuous system integrity, would be attempting to fail, gracefully and succeeding only partially. The server room temperature would be rising. The backup protocols would be activating in sequence and failing in sequence, because the backup protocols had been built on assumptions about the core architecture that were no longer accurate. He knew this because he had built the core architecture. He also knew that the failure mode he was looking at, the specific signature of a core AI collapse at that depth, was not something any of the current engineering team would know how to approach. They had inherited the system. They had extended it, modified it, built on top of it. But the root layer, the part that was now failing, was 11 years old and had been written by one person in a specific way for specific reasons that were not fully documented anywhere except inside Nathan Reed's memory. Mia said. She was using the word she used when she wanted his full attention. "What's happening?" "Something broke," he said. "Can you fix it?" He looked at the building. He thought about the badge in his pocket, and the protocol layer no one had looked for, and the specific feeling of watching something he had built being destroyed, because the people currently responsible for it did not have the knowledge to save it. "Yes," he said. Mia looked up at him. "Then why are you still standing here?" He looked down at her for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the building. The lobby was controlled chaos facilities, staff running protocols, security, directing employees away from the server wing. A woman from communications, standing near the reception desk, speaking rapidly into a phone with the expression of someone who is trying very hard to sound calmer than she feels. Nathan walked through all of it without stopping, the way he always walked through things, without urgency and without hesitation, at the pace of a man who has already decided where he is going. The security checkpoint at the server wing entrance was manned by a guard named Marcus, who had worked the Atlas Tower for 4 years, and knew Nathan Reed the way you know a person you see every day, without ever learning their full story by his schedule, his coffee order, and the fact that he always said good morning before most people were coherent enough to manage it. Marcus looked at the revoked badge. Marcus looked at Nathan. "Systems critical," Nathan said. Marcus stepped aside. The server room was 3 levels below ground, accessed through a stairwell that only facilities and senior IT personnel were credentialed to use. Nathan descended it with the particular quality of attention of someone returning to a place they know by memory rather than by sight. He could feel the heat before he reached the bottom landing. The servers were running hot, which meant the thermal management system had already been compromised. Victoria Hayes was standing outside the server room door when he arrived. She was the chief financial officer of Atlas Dynamics, 52 years old, and built for precision, precise in speech, precise in thought, and possessed of the particular alertness of someone who had been watching the company's internal power dynamics for a long time, and had developed through sustained observation a set of suspicions she had never been given grounds to act on. She looked at Nathan. "You're not employed here anymore," she said. "I know," he said. "The system requires a founder-level access credential that no one currently employed by Atlas Dynamics possesses. I know that too." She stepped back from the door. The biometric panel beside the server room entrance was a retinal scanner, a model installed during the building's original construction and never updated because the original installation was still functioning, and no one had thought to ask why a maintenance employee would still have credentials registered in a system that old. Nathan pressed his face to the scanner. The light swept across his eye. The display read, "Founder access granted. Welcome, Nathan Reed." From somewhere in the corridor behind him, a junior IT technician said something that was not quite a word. Victoria Hayes said nothing. She simply watched the door open and watched Nathan walk through it, and then she followed him. Mia had followed at a distance that was close enough to maintain visual contact, and far enough to avoid being stopped by anyone with authority she might have had to negotiate around. She stood now on the far side of the corridor's observation window, her face pressed to the glass, watching her father sit down at the primary terminal of the core server bank and begin to type. She had never seen him work before. Not like this. She had seen him fix things, circuit panels in their apartment building, the elevator mechanism at her school that had been broken for 3 months, before someone thought to ask if anyone knew how to repair it, the refrigeration unit at the diner 2 blocks from their apartment that the owner had been told would cost $3,000 to replace, and that Nathan had restored to function in 40 minutes using parts from a hardware store. She had grown up understanding that her father could fix almost anything, but she had understood it the way children understand facts about their parents, as background information. Part of the fixed landscape, not something that required sustained attention. What she was watching now was different. It was not the motion of a man repairing a broken thing. It was the motion of a man who had written the language. The broken thing was written in someone for whom the code was not a foreign document to be interpreted but a native grammar as familiar as speech. Inside the server room, Nathan was moving through the core architecture with the speed and precision of someone navigating a space they designed. The failure cascade had originated in the 3rd sublayer of the primary process manager, a conflict between 2 protocols that had been modified independently over the years until their interaction produced an impossible instruction to lope. The current engineering team had patched around this conflict 17 times in the past 2 years, which was why the system had been generating small errors with increasing frequency. They had been treating the symptom. They had not known where to look for the cause. Nathan knew where to look. He also found, while navigating the core directory structure, a folder he had not created. It was labeled Emily. It was locked with an encryption protocol that was different from the standard Atlas security architecture, older, more specific, the kind of encryption you use when you want something buried rather than simply protected. He had found it once before in the early months after he returned to work at Atlas and had not opened it because he had not been ready for what might be inside. He had thought about it often since then. He looked at the folder for 3 seconds. Then he copied its location, completed the primary system restoration, and brought the Atlas Dynamics AI architecture back online in 47 minutes. The screen stopped being red. In the corridor outside, people who had been running began to slow. Nathan sat back from the terminal. His breathing was controlled. His hands were steady. He was thinking about a folder and a name and a Tuesday morning in March 8 years ago, when a police officer had knocked on the door of their apartment in Brooklyn, and Nathan had known from the specific quality of the knock, not from any rational deduction, but from some animal part of him that understood the weight of what was coming, that his life was about to split into before and after. Emily Reed had been a journalist. She had covered the technology industry for 9 years, with the combination of technical literacy and narrative instinct that made her particularly effective at finding the stories that people with technical power preferred not to be told. In the last 4 months of her life, she had been investigating a project within Atlas Dynamics that Nathan had not known existed, a contract with a government agency that used the Atlas intelligence architecture for population-level surveillance that no civilian oversight body had been informed about. She had told Nathan she was working on something large. She had not told him the details because she was protecting him not from legal consequences but from the choice she knew he would feel obligated to make if he knew. She had died in a car accident on an overpass outside the city on a Tuesday morning in March. The other driver had run a red light. The investigation had been closed within 2 weeks. Nathan had never believed it was an accident. He had also never had anything to put that belief against. He had been grieving and then managing and then surviving, and the company had been restructured around him while he was doing those things, and by the time he had his feet under him again, the people who might have had answers were in positions of power that made asking the questions feel impossible. The Emily folder on the Atlas core server was the first concrete thing he had ever found. He encrypted the folder's location in a personal backup protocol and stood up from the terminal. Victoria Hayes was waiting on the other side of the door. "I need," she said, "to understand what you just did." "I restored the primary process manager," Nathan said. "The failure originated in a loop conflict in sublayer 3. I've documented the fix. Your IT team will be able to see the full change log." "That's not what I mean." He looked at her. "I've been the CFO of this company for 6 years," she said. "I've had questions about the company's foundational architecture, its original IP documentation, and the terms of the founder transition for most of that time. I've been told there is no documentation problem." A pause. "Watching you walk in here and access systems that should by every record I have access to be completely inaccessible to you, that's not a maintenance employee improvising. That's someone who built this." Nathan said nothing. "The equity restructuring documents from 8 years ago," Victoria said. "Were they signed under duress?" "They were signed," Nathan said, "by someone who was not in a state to understand what he was signing." She held his gaze for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should tell me what's in the restricted directory you accessed before you restored the system." He thought about this. "Not here," he said, "and not yet." He walked to the door of the corridor, where Mia was waiting on the other side of the glass, with the expression of someone who has been standing very still for a long time, while also being very frightened and very determined not to show the frightened part. He opened the door. She stepped forward and put her arms around his waist, which was something she had done since she was 4 years old, and showed no signs of stopping, and he put his hand on the back of her head and stood there in the corridor, while the Atlas Dynamics server infrastructure hummed back to its normal register behind them. "You fixed it," she said. "Yes. I saw through the window," she said. "You knew exactly where everything was." "I built it," he said. She pulled back and looked up at him. She was putting something together: the badge, the firing, the retinal. "Scan the founder access granted text." She had been close enough to the window to read. She was a child who had spent 10 years learning to read adult situations quickly, and she was reading this one now. "Why were you doing maintenance?" she asked. It was the question he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it for a very long time. "Because I let people take things from me," he said. "When I didn't have enough left to fight for them." She looked at him for another moment. "Do you have enough now?" she asked. He thought about Emily's name in a locked folder. He thought about Victoria Hayes and the questions she had been carrying for 6 years. He thought about the equity documents and the board resolutions and the specific deliberate patience of men who wait for a grieving person to stop paying attention. "Yes," he said. The confrontation with Ethan Cole happened 3 days later in the server room at 11 o'clock at night, after Nathan had spent 72 hours building the documentation that he had decided to build before he said anything to anyone that could not be unsaid. He worked the way he had always worked, methodically, completely, with the understanding that the difference between an accusation and a finding is the quality of the evidence supporting it. He had copies of the original architecture documentation from 11 years ago, time-stamped and authenticated, through a third-party forensic IT firm he contacted without disclosing the subject of the investigation. He had the complete changelog from the restructuring period, cross-referenced against the equity modification documents. He had a technical analysis of the Emily folder's encryption, not its contents which he had not yet opened, but its metadata, which showed that it had been created not by Emily, but by a system administrator account registered to Lucas, Reed, his brother, 8 years ago. That was the finding that changed the shape of everything. Lucas Reed was 4 years younger than Nathan and had been part of Atlas Dynamics from the beginning, not as a technical founder, but as the person who managed relationships, partnerships, and the internal politics that Nathan had never had patience for. He had always been charming in a way that Nathan was not, and Nathan had trusted him completely, which was a mistake of the specific kind that people make about the people they love most. The documentation of what Lucas had done was not complicated once Nathan understood the timeline. He had worked with Ethan Cole, who had been Nathan's protege, and had genuinely admired Nathan with the complicated admiration of a person who wants to become someone else, and together they had managed the board through the period of Nathan's grief with a precision that was indistinguishable from the outside from competent stewardship. The equity restructuring had transferred controlling interest. The board composition had been revised. Nathan had been offered a consulting role that he had declined because he was not ready to return and that had been quietly allowed to expire. The Emily folder was the part that Nathan had not expected. He opened it on the third day. Inside were 17 documents. 14 of them were drafts of the story Emily had been working on, stages of an investigation into a surveillance contract between Atlas Dynamics and a federal intelligence agency. A contract that Lucas had arranged without Nathan's knowledge and that had generated significant revenue and significant legal exposure, and that had been, Nathan now understood, the thing that had made Emily Reed dangerous enough to someone that her death had been arranged rather than suffered. The other 3 documents were communications. 2 were between Lucas Reed and a man Nathan recognized as a mid-level government contractor. The third was an email between Lucas and Ethan Cole dated 6 weeks before Emily's death discussing what they called the exposure problem and how to manage it. Nathan sat with these documents for a long time. Then he called Victoria Hayes. Ethan came to the server room because Nathan had sent a message through the building's internal system requesting a technical consultation, which was the kind of message that someone who has just saved the company's infrastructure has standing to send, and that Ethan would have been suspicious not to answer. He arrived alone, which was the decision of a man who understood that whatever was about to happen, he preferred it not to happen with witnesses. The server room was dark except for the equipment, lighting the blue-green glow of active terminals, the amber of status indicators, the slow breathing of machines that were doing what they were built to do. Nathan was sitting at the primary terminal. He did not stand when Ethan entered. Ethan closed the door. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They had known each other for 18 years. Nathan had hired Ethan out of graduate school, had mentored him through 5 years of building the company, had trusted him with things that required absolute trust. The history between them was real, which was the part that made everything else worse. "I know about Lucas," Nathan said. "I know about the surveillance contract. I know about the communications from 6 weeks before Emily died." Ethan did not move. "I know Nathan said that you were 29 years old, and you made choices you did not fully understand the weight of. And I know that you have spent 8 years building something because you thought if you built it large enough and successful enough, it would become the thing it was supposed to be." He paused. It didn't. Ethan's voice, when it came, was not the voice of a magazine cover. It was smaller than that and younger, and it had the specific quality of something that has been held under compression for a very long time. "I built everything," Ethan said, "because I wanted to become you." Nathan looked at him. "No," Nathan said. "You destroyed everything because you stopped being yourself." The room was quiet. One of the servers produced a sound that was almost like a sigh. "I didn't know she was going to die," Ethan said. "I need you to know that. I knew there was a problem. I knew Lucas was managing it. I did not know what managing it meant." "You knew enough to ask," Nathan said. "You didn't ask." Ethan sat down against the far wall, still in his Italian suit, and put his face in his hands. It was the gesture of someone whose performance has finally ended, not because they chose to stop, but because they no longer have the energy to continue it. Nathan stood up. He had already, before Ethan arrived, sent the complete documentation package to 3 recipients: Victoria Hayes, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division, and a federal district court judge whom he had contacted through an attorney with whom he had spent most of the previous 72 hours. He had also sent to a journalist he had known for 11 years, and trusted completely the full contents of the Emily folder. He walked to the door. Ethan said. Nathan, stop. What happens now? The documentation goes where it goes, Nathan said. The people who need to see it have already seen it. What happens next isn't mine to decide. He opened the door, and Lucas, Ethan asked, is currently speaking with federal investigators, Nathan said. Victoria arranged the meeting this morning. He left. The morning that followed had the quality of weather that has been building for a long time and has finally arrived. The Atlas Dynamics Tower was surrounded by vehicles before the markets opened. 2 from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, 1 from the SEC, and a group of reporters who had been tipped by sources they had not been able to verify until they were already on site. The story broke in the financial press first, and then moved outward. The way things that are genuinely significant move without respect for the categories people use to contain them. Lucas Reed was apprehended on the building's rooftop terrace at approximately 7:45 in the morning, attempting to access a private aviation arrangement that had already been cancelled by the time he reached the private all-black Tarmats. He was cooperative in the particular way of someone who has run the calculations and understands that cooperation is now the only variable he controls. Ethan Cole submitted his resignation to the board at 8 o'clock and was escorted out of the building by security in the manner of someone who has chosen in the end to go quietly. The board convened an emergency session. Oliver Grant, the primary institutional investor, arrived, looking like a man who has recently understood that the asset he prized most highly was more complicated than his models had accounted for, and sat through 4 hours of proceedings with the expression of someone revising their fundamental assumptions in real time. Victoria Hayes ran the meeting. Nathan was not in it. He had gone home. Mia was at the kitchen table when he arrived, eating cereal and reading a book in the specific morning quiet of a child who has not yet been told what the day will contain. She looked up when he came in and read his face with the automatic practiced attention she had developed over years of being the person most attuned to his internal weather. It happened, she said. It was not a question. It happened, he confirmed. She pushed the cereal box toward him in a gesture of solidarity. He sat down. He poured himself a bowl. They ate in silence for a while, looking at the morning light coming through the kitchen window, and Nathan thought about Emily and about what it meant to have done finally the thing he had been carrying undone for 8 years. He thought it meant he could sleep. Not tonight necessarily, and not without grief, which was a permanent weather condition that he had long since stopped expecting to clear. But soon, in some essential way soon, the board offered him the position of Chief Executive Officer of Atlas Dynamics, 3 weeks after the emergency session, in a letter that was formally worded and that Victoria Hayes delivered in person, which was her way of indicating that she endorsed it. Nathan read the letter at the kitchen table. He thought about it for 4 days. Then he went back to Victoria and told her no. She looked at him for a long moment. May I ask why? She said. Because the thing I want to build, he said, is not what that company is. It might become what I'd want it to be eventually, with a great deal of work by people who have more patience for that kind of structural reform than I do. But that's not where my work is. Where is your work? He told her. She nodded slowly with the expression of someone who is not surprised, but is taking the time to confirm that she was not surprised for the right reasons. You'll need funding, she said. I know where to start. The company Nathan incorporated 4 months later had 12 employees, a leased office space in Long Island City that smelled of fresh paint, and the particular optimism of rooms that have not yet accumulated the weight of their own history, and a focus that was narrow by deliberate design, artificial intelligence applications for pediatric diagnostic medicine, specifically designed for use in under-resourced hospital systems where the diagnostic support that wealthier institutions took for granted was unavailable. He had been thinking about this for years, not as a business plan, but as a question that stayed with him. He had built the foundational architecture for one of the most powerful AI systems in the country, and the primary applications it had been used for were advertising optimization and logistics efficiency, and it turned out government surveillance. The architecture itself was not the problem. The architecture was neutral. What you chose to build on it was the choice that mattered. He wanted to build something that mattered differently. Mia had been told about the new company in the careful, factual way that Nathan explained things to her directly, without excessive softening, with the implicit respect of treating her intelligence seriously. She had processed it in the way she processed things, with a period of quiet and then a question. Can I help? She said. You can help with the logo, he said. She spent 2 weeks on the logo. It was simple, a small bright shape that was not quite a star and not quite a spark, something between the two in a specific blue that she had mixed from 3 different colors until she arrived at the one she meant. She presented it to him at the kitchen table with the seriousness of a professional presenting work they believe in. He looked at it for a long time. "Yes," he said. "That's it." They moved the logo to a new office on a Monday morning in October, when the light had the quality that October light has in New York, golden and specific, and aware of itself, as though it knows how brief it is and is choosing to be remarkable about it. The Long Island City office had large windows on the east-facing side, and in the early morning, the light came through them and lay across the floor in long horizontal bars that moved as the sun moved, which was something Nathan noticed. The first morning he stood in the room and thought, yes, this is the right room. He had kept the same apartment in Brooklyn. Mia had asked about this once in the matter-of-fact way she asked about most things. "We could move," she said. "Now, if you wanted." "I know," he said. "Do you want to?" He thought about it. "Not yet. I want to remember what things cost." She nodded in the way she nodded when she was storing something. "The money kind or the other kind?" "The other kind," he said. She nodded again. "Okay," she said, and went back to her homework. On a Tuesday morning in late November, the office had 7 people in it by 7 o'clock, which was when Nathan arrived, which was earlier than most, but later than the 2 engineers who had already been there since 6 because they were working on a diagnostic model for pediatric cardiac anomaly detection and had reached the stage of their work where hours have a different relationship to progress than they do at other stages. The coffee machine was running. Someone had brought pastries. The low November sun was doing what the October sun had done, coming through the east windows at an angle that turned the room golden in a way that felt specific rather than atmospheric. Nathan sat at his desk and opened his laptop. On the screen beside it, a small television was cycling through the morning news. A segment appeared with archive footage of the Atlas Dynamics Tower and a graphic reading, "The Janitor founder how Atlas Dynamics true crater brought down Silicon Valley's largest AI empire." One of the engineers glanced at it, then at Nathan. Nathan did not look at the screen. He was reading a report on their model's current performance metrics, making a note in the margin with the pen he preferred to use for notes because the physical act of writing helped him think in a particular way. Mia arrived at 3:30, let in by the office's front desk in the easy way of someone who is known and expected. She had an after-school program on Tuesdays that ended at 3, and the office was 14 minutes from her school, which she had pointed out when he showed her the lease paperwork in the tone of someone making an observation rather than an argument. She dropped her bag at the small desk in the corner of Nathan's office that had been set up specifically for this purpose. A desk her height with a good lamp and a cup that held colored pencils, and opened her sketchbook. She was working on something. She had been working on it for 3 days, and had not yet told him what it was, which was her process. She showed things when they were finished, not before. He worked. She drew. The office around them produced its ordinary sounds, keyboards, conversation, the coffee machine's intermittent noise, someone laughing at something on the far side of the room. At 4:30, Mia looked up. "Bah," she said. He looked at her. She held up the sketchbook. She had drawn 2 figures, a tall one and a small one, standing in a room with large windows and bars of light across the floor. Between them on a table was a small bright shape that was not quite a star and not quite a spark. He looked at it for a long time. "That's us," he said. "Yes," she said. She turned it back toward herself and looked at it. "I wanted to draw it before I forgot what it felt like." He did not ask what she meant. He understood what she meant. She meant this. The room, the light, the ordinary sounds of a place where people were building something they believed in. The particular feeling of a life that has been through its worst season and has arrived through persistence and grief and the stubborn daily work of continuing somewhere it can rest. Not forever. Nothing is forever. But for now, for this specific Tuesday afternoon in November, with the golden light moving across the floor and the coffee machine and the laugh from across the room for now, he went back to his report. She went back to her drawing. Outside the windows, the city was doing what cities do, moving, generating the constant low-frequency hum of 11 million people living their various lives in the same approximate space. Nathan Reed had helped build part of the infrastructure that moved through those lives like invisible water, and he had done it once badly and once well, and he understood now in a way he had not understood before that the second time had been possible because of the first. That the cost of the first time, the grief, the loss, the 6 years of maintenance badges and gray uniforms, had been the cost of becoming someone who understood completely and without abstraction what it meant to build something for the right. Reasons. Mia capped her pencil and looked at him. Chapter 7 tonight, she said. Chapter 7, he said. Definitely chapter 7. She zipped her bag and came around the desk and kissed him on the top of his head, which she had been doing since she was 6, and showed no signs of stopping. And then she went back to her corner and opened her book, and Nathan Reed sat in the golden afternoon light of a room he had chosen for the sprash, right reasons, and did the work he had chosen to do. And outside the windows the city moved, and the light moved with it, and somewhere across the river, a November evening was arriving slowly, as evenings do with the particular patience of things that have all the time they need.